Hi, everyone. I'm Lisa. I'm the head of impact at the Water Bear Network. And this is Ted.
Hi, I'm Ted Rashane from Vulcan Productions, where I'm Senior Director of Strategy, Engagement, and Impact.
All right. We just wanted to say thank you so much to the sponsors of this session. First of all, National Geographic partners. Also, I want to just congratulate Jackson Wild for this amazing setup here. It is super awesome and impressive. I'm really excited. Thank you. Cool. Ted, do you want to just quickly introduce the speakers who we have, and then we'll go into...
Yeah, I'd be happy to. And I'm going to ask each of the speakers to, as they talk and get into this conversation, to talk a little bit more about their current work, how it's related to impact campaigns. But kudos to the Jackson Wild team for bringing together a really amazing panel today. Maggie Stogner, who I actually met last year at Jackson Wild and is doing amazing work at the Center for Environmental Filmmaking. My friend Beatty Finzi from the Doc Society, who will tell you more about the work that they're doing, who we're collaborating with them right now on some projects, but also just have been a huge fanboy for years on what the Doc Society is doing in leading the pack when it comes to impact. Beverly and Derek Joubert are doing, bring a great experience here. Many of you in the audience are super familiar with their work. They're award-winning filmmakers. They're going to bring the perspective of the filmmaker to the impact world. Vanessa from the National Geographic Society is the creative director and executive producer of the storytelling department there. And I'm really anxious to hear what she has to say about how they're approaching impact from National Geographic Society as a storyteller, as a distributor, but also as a large NGO. And then my old friend Gina Papabeas from who's I've worked with on a couple of films over the years and different projects, and is a filmmaker, an impact producer, and someone who's going to be talking from those perspectives as well. So welcome everybody, and welcome to those in the chat, or there in the audience, or in the yard, or whatever we're calling this. This is a really interesting environment. But it's also one where I think we can have great conversation. Lisa, do you want to talk a little bit about the Jackson Wild Coalition, and then we can talk about our conversation today?
Sure. So there's a bunch of us who have been talking a lot about impact campaigns and what that really means, and how we could be doing better in this industry on impact campaigns. We've been talking for the last couple of months. We've had several discussions that have been super interesting. So we've brought people who have been part of those discussions today to share their thoughts on really like what's missing in this field, how we could be doing better, and really like what are we challenging the Jackson Wild community to do right now in terms of impact campaigns.
And just one more thing before we jump into the conversation, we really do want this to be a conversation. We've asked the panelists to come prepared to share their opinions on this issue, to point out areas where they may disagree with their fellow panelists, and really get into this. At the end of the day, we want this to be of value to the Jackson community. And so one of the silver linings of not being there together in the same room, which is a bummer, but one of the silver linings is that we can make this increasingly interactive. So if you're familiar with the tool, there's a chat function that you should see at the bottom of your screen, or maybe it's on the right. I'm not exactly sure where it is, but it's on your screen. And use that chat, please, if you have reactions, if you have thoughts, if you have questions and things that you want to sort of incorporate into the conversation. And then we'll do that, and we'll feed that into our panelists and go from there. So I think from that, with that, I think we can jump into it, and hoping that we'll bring our other panelists on stage. I think that's how it works, but in any case, we're ready to go.
Cool. Yeah. Abby, is it possible that you can bring them all on? Great. Hi, Maggie.
Hi, great to be here.
Is everybody coming on now, or just Maggie? We can definitely just get going with Maggie. That would be great. Actually, you would be perfect to start with, Maggie, because we have been having some discussions about really what we mean by impact when it comes to achieving it alongside films. and what we mean by impact campaigns. So it would be great if you could talk through your report, which you've just published today, I think, and
Today.
you can share that with everyone here. It's amazing. I looked through it yesterday. It looks great. Really, really thorough. So congratulations on that. But we'd love to hear from you on what you really feel impact in terms of filmmaking is, and then specifically, like, what is an impact campaign?
Yeah, thank you so much for asking. And I'm just delighted to be here. And I kudos to Jackson Wild folks for organizing such an amazing virtual event. Wow. And we're very excited. I run the Center for Environmental Filmmaking now, and I was looking at gaps and having these discussions with different people about, well, what is impact, and why do we have like the creatives over here and the impact producers over there, and really trying to look at a 21st century model, not just myself, but a whole group of us. It was our Impact Media Report. It's creative, collaborative, and outreach strategies for nature, environmental, and science films. We just put it out today. It will be available through the Jackson Wild resources. And I want to say very much a thank you to HHMI Tanglebank Studios and Margie Schmill for funding this report and supporting us on this research. And my graduate assistants, Carlos Macher and Nicole Wackerly, they helped with the research, they helped with the writing, the conceptualizing, and we spoke with many, many, many people. There are lots of examples in the report, we did case studies. And to me, it's a launch pad for a conversation we really need to have this century about looking forward and how to build more global, equitable capacity in our filmmaking approaches, in our filmmaking creative design, collaborations and alliances, outreach strategies, and really think about it from kind of a more of a visionary change model. There's no question things are incredibly urgent today. We need to think about how we can not just change minds and hearts, but cultures and behaviors. And what is that impact? What does that impact mean, going forward? And so this is the beginning of a conversation. I hope everybody will respond and give us feedback on the report. And we would love to build more case studies, conversations with impact innovators. I interviewed the 3 impact campaign finalists. That's recorded, and you can look at that in the program. Great, amazing campaigns, all 3 of them. So I just think it's an exciting time and a challenging time, because we have this incredibly fragmented media, kind of multi-layered media landscape today, and how to navigate that is challenging. But we have great opportunities because we can look at things globally, but we can also very much look at things locally, micro-target, and we have the technologies to do it today too, in a way that's much more inclusive. So I'm very excited. So I really hope this report just furthers the conversation.
Thank you, Maggie. That would be wonderful for everybody to be able to look at that report. It's in the chat. If you can't see that, Melanie just put it in there. Bidi, I would love to hear from you on your definition of impact and what you think really is an impact campaign.
So I think I probably, I don't know, maybe I have a more narrow definition than others on this panel, but I'm just going to put it there and leave it hanging. So I was literally with a group of filmmakers just earlier, British filmmakers. They have very little ideas around impact and distribution. We were trying to untangle some terms, and it was literally like, listen, folks, distribution is all about reach. It's often defined by box office. Success is defined by metrics around box office, around if you can get your viewing figures, those viewing figures from either traditional platforms or streamers, and they're like, yeah, but then what are audience engagement strategies? And I'm like, okay, well, those are strategies to reach audience, and that often intersects with distribution. Impact campaigns, I believe, is justice organizing using film. It is a far more deliberate set of activity. It's centering the decisions around the production of the film, the distribution around the film, around a very different objective. Reach may be part of that strategy. Box office may be part of that strategy, but it's no longer the defining kind of like the driving force and determining force in those decisions.
Yeah, thank you. That's awesome. It's a lot of food for thought, because I think that a lot of people do consider impact also include engagement, the reach, the views, the how far your film goes, and the response from the audience. I agree personally that impact is really results on the ground. and how you use your film to achieve those results on the ground. And I'd love to bring Vanessa in now, because I know that the National Geographic Society, she runs the media team there, and they have been working on telling stories from an impact perspective and involving impact right from the start. So I'd love to know a little bit more about how you do that, Vanessa.
Great. Hi, everyone. So I'm coming from the perspective of a filmmaker who is embedded with a nonprofit. And as a nonprofit, we don't, impact filmmaking is not just a singular event, right? It's part of our ongoing strategy for achieving change in the world. And and I think what's interesting is this has been a transition over the past 5 or so years. When I started at the Society and at National Geographic, we kind of were singularly focused on reach, as you said, and volume. And over the past several years, then we've transitioned to really focusing not on that one metric, but on multiple forms of impact and being much more targeted in who we're trying to reach and why. And I think I'll have 2 tools that I'll share through the resources in Jackson. The first is our theory of change, and that assumes that media can take an individual from being unaware of an issue to eventually having sustained behavior change. But that doesn't happen all at once, right? That's one piece of media is very unlikely to do that whole entire change journey. So we really think about how can we work along that change spectrum over time, and for each project, identifying where our audience is along that continuum and where we want them to be, and then creating a piece of media that will get them there. And then the second tool is our process, which actually does not begin with a story or a film idea, right? It begins, that's actually step 4. Step 1 is identifying a clear goal. Step 2, who is the audience we have to reach to achieve that goal? And then step 3 is where will we reach them? What is the platform? Because the answer to those 3 questions will then determine what kind of media you make. Is it a feature film that will be shown in a theater? Is it a 30-second social video that's reaching, Gen Z on TikTok? So that's kind of how we're thinking about media now, and it's been a real shift from how we thought about it as a mass media company.
So Beverly, I'm curious, Beverly and Derek, maybe you could weigh in here, and Gina, I want to come to you too, because as filmmakers and creatives, maybe I'm curious how you could react to that sort of approach that Vanessa just sort of outlined, and maybe some examples that you've had in the past, how you've arrived at stories, right? Whether it's we saw a problem that needed solving, so we decided on a story, or you saw a story that needed to be told, and as you went into that story, realized that there was other things that you could do to have impact. I know the story and the example you provided around the lions, and that was certainly an interesting example to maybe explore.
Absolutely. In fact, we've done it both ways, but I believe ever since Derek and I started in film, at the core of who we are conservationists. So we always had that, how are we going to make an impact? How are we going to help the decision makers, create change in the country without, criticizing them in the press? We really wanted them to take the knowledge and to be able to make the right decisions on the wildlife. And so each and every film in the 80s and 90s would hopefully create an awareness, bring people in to really love the animal's story and have empathy towards them. And then, of course, towards the end, we'd weave the conservation in, but towards the end, we would get a hard-hitting, powerful message about conservation. And then we would take the films and have premiere screenings and open discussions with the decision makers of the country, as well as translate the film into the local language. And we always felt that that was essential. So that's how we started. Then when we did a film on a leopard, Eye of the Leopard, how many years ago was that? 15 years ago. She she took us into a new way of being an ambassador. And that was after making the film over 4 years, and really she seduced us in so many ways. And I believe she did seduce the audience as well. We knew after seeing that 10,000 leopards are killed, that were killed in that period, and that was just legally killed. So we knew that there was, a huge amount that was poached as well, illegal kills for their coats and that we needed to do a difference. And that's where we started the Big Cat Initiative at the National Geographic. And that was, I think, 12 years ago. So we were a little ahead of what Vanessa was talking about, but it was the start. And then, of course, taking it further.
Well, I just think that the lesson here is from a statement that General Patton made, which is, I think he said something like, he had never known a battle go according to plan, but he had never known a battle won that didn't have a plan. And I think that when we're talking about impact, we want to have a plan first. And so what we do in general, to your question, Ted, is we identify a problem. We also go through a few steps, like Vanessa was saying. We identify a problem, then we apply what we can to amplify that and talk about it, to ultimately end up with a fix. And then the fix doesn't end at the end of the film. We then take that film, as Beverly said, and we take it back again into those communities to create a circular discussion around the problem and the fix. A really good example, not to be long-winded, is we came across the fact that Maasai were killing a lot of lions in a certain area. And so we spoke to the elders and came up with a notion with them that forming the Maasai Olympics to redirect that energy away from spearing lions into field and track athletics. And so we did a film on that. And it was a real event, the Maasai Olympics. And then we showed the film at the next Maasai Olympics. And the result of that now is that the film has legs as well, and it's translated into Ma and Swahili. And now we have other communities in Kenya and Tanzania saying, because of the film, we also want to do a Maasai Olympics. So there's an impact campaign that's circular, keeps going on.
I love that one. I think it's great that you basically sort of created a solution first with the Maasai. And so you created the campaign, really, and then you made a film about the campaign, and then you used the film as a tool to keep supporting the extension of that campaign. Super clever.
I also love and believe that was the first time that I've ever heard Patton quoted in a panel, so well done.
Exactly, yeah.
Gina, sorry. Gina, you've been working on Racing Extinction and Purple Mountains and maybe other impact campaigns as well around films that you've been working on. So I'd love to hear your view on what you think really is a great impact campaign.
Mm-hmm. So for context, I am currently a senior producer at Sound Off Films and an impact producer on the film Purple Mountains, which is currently in release, in the throes of its impact campaign. So a lot of the things I may talk about are specific to that film, but prior to that, I worked for 10 years at the Oceanic Preservation Society on the Cove, Racing Extinction, and the Game Changers. And to go back to what Ted was saying around the creation of story first versus impact and issue first. I think all of the films that I have worked on to date have tended to be, we identify an issue that we want to create change within, and then we find the story along the way. But typically there is some aspect of the story that does exist. There has to be a kernel there, otherwise it's not worth pursuing as a film. But it is a challenge of trying to find something that is entertaining and engaging and that doesn't leave people feeling completely hopeless. And to what Derek was saying, having a solution on screen in the film lays the foundation for that audience interaction in creating impact. I think much more a film that just illuminates an issue and then leaves it hanging. And so that's also a challenge as a filmmaker. Is your role just to tell someone else's story, or is it your job to fix the problem and to document what that solution looks like? And I think a lot of filmmakers just want to tell the story and then let somebody else do the impact. And the result of doing that is it feels very tacked on, whether it's just like an end card or a URL just slapped to the end of the film, or there's not continuity between the viewing experience of the film versus what actions you want people to take. And so I think the best examples of impact are ones where that is embedded into the storyline of the film. And that's something that I'm very interested in continuing to pursue as somebody who straddles the filmmaking side and the impact producing side, is how do we make it abundantly clear to people when the credits start to roll, what their involvement is in this story, what action needs to take place. And I'll just give one example with The Cove. The number one question people would come up to us afterwards is, oh, wow, I love the film, I'm engaged, you have me, what can I do? And it was almost like a dagger in the heart every time. It's like, I just told you for 90 minutes. And so that was a great lesson learned and something that always stuck with me.
Yeah, I think that is interesting. That conversation around the responsibility of a filmmaker, right, to do impact is one that it's a fascinating conversation, and one that can that I don't know there's a right way to sort of address it, right? Because that you nailed it, Gina. There are those that feel as though, like, look, the film should be the impact, right? That's what I am. I'm a filmmaker. I'm a journalist. I'm going to tell that story, and then I'm going to move on. And then there's others who are approaching it like you're talking about here, right? Others are on the stage you're talking about, which is coming to this with a passion, not just for telling the story, but for actually moving the needle on the issue. Mm-hmm. And so I think that's a fascinating push-pull that will continue to go on. And we can explore some of that as we get further in the panel. Lisa, do we want to talk a little bit about partnerships and go to that piece?
I wanted to actually mention that the Doc Society has a really great resource called the Impact Field Guide. Is that right? And it's great. It's very extensive. But I wondered, Bidi, if you could give us your views on what do you think is missing in terms of impact campaigns in this industry at the moment. And yeah, from your perspective, what do you think we really could be doing better?
Well, I'm a gal half glass full, and I think we have, after a kind of long decade of enormous amounts of work globally, there's fantastic codified practice. There are awesome case studies. There is an army, a new generation of filmmakers, a whole new generation of impact producers who self-define that way, who are doing this work, who are executing this work in multiple contexts, not just in the US or the UK, but in every single continent, and they are smashing out of the park. Support, uplifting and working with some of the best documentary film in the world, but actually putting it to the service of movement to create, to your point, tangible social change, behavioral change, attitudinal change, but also change at the level of lawmakers, corporations, capacity building in the NGO sector. I mean, it's breathtaking, all right? So that's all the good news. We have come such a long way, and frankly, there's not an excuse. If anyone's curious, just roll up your sleeve, pull up to the table. There are all these extraordinary reports and frameworks for you to use. The practice is there. I think the thing that the field desperately needs is more, and this speaks, I think, also to what Gina was alluding to. We need, filmmakers often need a real input to help them figure out what the best impact strategy is and looks like. And if there was a funder sitting in the room right now, I'd say to them, honestly, one of the single most useful things you could do right now is put together a fund which would allow film teams to access, it can be quite a modest grant, but to actually buy them some time to work with an impact strategist to devise a fantastic campaign, not solve the problem, not pay for the whole thing, but imagine if that film is finishing up and under their arm is a brilliant, focused, strategic impact campaign that they can then go and fundraise against. That's what we need. Second thing, very quickly, and we can come back to this, I need to have tea with a lot of distributors and a lot of our broadcasters and streamers. They are still so 20th century about all this impact work. It's ridiculous, guys. Come to the table, don't get in our way, work with us. If you haven't noticed, the culture wars are going on and our globe is becoming more fractured. There is no conflict between distribution and impact work. It's a win-win-win-win-win. And we need to convert more of our cousins working at the streamers, working at the major corporate broadcast entities and the public service broadcasters to get on board to embrace ambitious film projects with great impact campaigns. That's what we've got to do. Whether it's tea or vodka, I don't know what we need. Whatever's going to work. I'm in.
Amen. And we can come back to that, because I'd love to sort of dive a little bit further into that, at least if we can later in the conversation, about specifically what we want, what we need from, because I think there's some ideas, and you touched on it, Beatty. There's this long-standing sort of fear, I think, on the part of some of our distributor friends that impact will cannibalize eyeballs, right? And I think we're seeing more and more that is absolutely the opposite of what's actually happening. So Maggie, maybe you could speak a little bit just in terms of, I know unfortunately we don't have time to go through your whole report, but maybe are there things that come to top of mind when that you guys found of what's missing in this space, or what needs to be addressed urgently? Some of the things that, in addition to what Beatty mentioned.
Yeah, I mean, where to start? And I am very optimistic, and I think there's so many opportunities. So I really look at it, just the idea that we need to think about more of those opportunities from the very inception of a project. It doesn't undermine the creative. The storyteller's right there. When I interviewed Rue for the Sea of Shadows Impact campaign, there was all this mapping out. Well, if the story goes this way, then we could do this. If the story goes that way, then we could do this. And then there's always these other layers that you don't think about that start to come together when you form strong alliances and when you think ahead. So I think that thinking about things from the inception, not being divisive about it. It's not, I've got this piece and you've got that piece. It's like, let's come together and really talk about how, if we all come together, how it can be a stronger project. I launched a new film called Unbreathable: The Fight for Healthy Air in June. And it's turned out to be a half an hour because our production got shut down from COVID. And actually it's brilliant at a half an hour. And what that really drove home to me is that you can make a shorter film and not have to own it all. Other people can create the surrounding films that build that project out, that there's a whole constellation. For instance, COVID and air pollution, there's all these different stories. We wanted to do a story, an Indigenous story, and that didn't get done, but those stories can build out around a core story. So it's not just the project itself, it's the life of what you're trying to work on, the life of the challenge and the problem that you're trying to solve. It's not just the life of the film. And when you start to think about things that way, and I don't think that, it's hard because we're thinking monetary models and how do you do that? But it's thinking about that core project and all the different ways it can build out through different partnerships, different collaborations, and different alliances. And that's on a grand scale, but it's also on that small scale. And one of the things that I was so excited about in doing this research is looking at all the innovations, things like Pooja Gupta, who's in the Media Lab, and I'm shout out, I have two alum, Robert Boyd and Katie Bryden, who's now at Conservation International in the Media Lab. They're doing some really interesting participatory work with the local communities so that it's a jointly made, similar to what, Beverly and Derek were talking about, it's a jointly made collaborative approach to filmmaking that really has impact at the local level. And so it's the journey itself that becomes the impact, not just that end, okay, now we have a product, let's get it out there, distribute it, and see if we can tack on some impact to Beatty's point. It's just, there's a much more holistic approach we can take to further that impact in a really significant way. And I'll just bring up one other example because I interviewed Maleka about the Thing You Say, another of the Impact finalists, campaign finalists, and they actually strategically thought about, we need to put the interaction we're having with policymakers in the film so that it doesn't end up like the Cove, like people are saying, well, so what do I do after they watch the film? But they're actually seeing it in the film. They're seeing a model and an example of the action that can be taken to affect that change.
Amazing, thanks, yeah. One of the things that I found particularly interesting is that the way that impact media has been working, sort of up until now, I think now it's really there's this big transformation happening where people are really starting to think about impact right from the start. But the way that it sort of has been happening, it's completely the reverse of how we do things in the NGO world. So I've previously worked for a lot of NGOs, including Greenpeace and Avaz, and we would always come up with a goal, a problem in the world that we really want to fix, and a theory of change, and then maybe there would be a film or some communication strategy that would form a tactic of that theory of change. And then I joined Patagonia and was asked to create a campaign for a film, Artificial, an amazing film, that had already been made. And it was like completely the reverse of the way that I've been working before. And one of the things that I'm super excited about now is seeing how the film industry is now changing and doing it more from the start. And also NGOs that have also not necessarily been really great at storytelling before are also getting better at that. And kind of, I feel like we're now meeting in the middle. And that's one of the reasons why I'm so excited about the Water Bear Network, where we're making high quality films and then partnering together with many NGOs from across the world to make sure that that impact really hits home and creates change in the world. We're launching at the end of November, by the way.
Yes.
I can't wait. And so that kind of brings me on to asking you guys, like, how important do you think partnerships are with NGOs? And should we be doing our own impact campaigns around films? Or should we sometimes consider letting an NGO do the campaign and we simply involve the film in their campaign? So whoever would like to speak to that, I'd be very interested to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with both Maggie and you, Lisa, that collaboration is key. I think we're at a place on this planet, and let's face it, it is a historic time now through COVID. Through the pandemic, I think it's making the world face up to the fact that we have to escalate our efforts. So to escalate our efforts, I don't think one person can do it. We'd have to collaborate. So creating those alliances are really key. I'll go back to the Big Cat Initiative, and then I want to use another example. But the Big Cat Initiative now has grantees in the field, 100 and sort of over 150 in 27 countries. And each and every one has their own projects working with communities, great education happening, but also the communities are now part of the force, and they are the conservationists. And so what we're doing there is putting out grants so that they can tell their own stories. And those stories, will be told by the locals, and hopefully they'll go to governments, and coming from the locals will be a lot more effective. The other project that we're doing, we only started this in March, purely because of the pandemic. We saw that there's a future pandemic happening in Africa right now in all the pristine areas, and that is an alarming bushmeat trade, and it truly is nefarious. It's not necessarily about poverty and people are starving. They're taking advantage of borders closed, and all the rangers have been furloughed. 40,000 rangers in Africa, and at least half of them have been furloughed. So it's been an easy opportunity for people to go in. And what we have been doing since that time, we've created this Project Ranger, and we've gone out to every single NGO and said, how can we partner? How can we be more effective? How can we raise funding and assist the frontline workers? Those are the people that are out there in the field. We have conversations with them once a week in various parts of Africa. And the stories they tell us are chilling. They're chilling for their own safety, but they're also chilling in what's happening to the environment. And that truly is at least a $50 billion industry for the African continent in safari. So, if we lose those wilderness areas, the communities in those areas are certainly going to suffer. Oh, and then this is very different, but we will then create a film. And so the film will come so much later. Right now, it's about rolling up our sleeves and seeing what we can do, but bringing in an alliance.
Amazing. Thank you.
That's great.
Gina, you put your hand up before.
Yeah, Gina and Vanessa, you can go after that because I saw you raising your hand. Thank you.
I'm waving back.
Right.
I can speak to a real tangible example of what that nonprofit partnership looks like, specifically with Purple Mountains. As like one liner, the film follows professional snowboarder Jeremy Jones as he reaches out to people in purple states to have uncomfortable yet honest conversations around where we disagree on climate change with the goal of finding common ground. And the film, Jeremy Jones started the nonprofit organization Protect Our Winters. So our campaign has been in like very, very close collaboration with POW. And I think the benefit of it coming together that way is I don't have to be the issue expert. I can lean on all of the work that they've already been doing in finding how to communicate climate change to our target audience of outdoor enthusiasts. And they've already done a lot of work around voter outreach, which is ultimately has been the focus of our campaign as the action. And so that legwork was kind of already done for us. I think where the learning curve has been is around they're not film, they don't do a lot of film work. It tends to be more social media driven. And so there has been just a learning process along the way of how to best use film to mobilize their audience. I think it's been a pleasant surprise for them. Our premiere event through their own streaming channel was the most successful event that they had. But there was a lot of uncertainty and just things we've learned kind of in real time the hard way around like even what the bandwidth is on each of our teams in executing that kind of partnership. And I think there has to be a little bit of an education up front from both parties around what the reality of executing a campaign and releasing a film together really looks like.
Cool, thank you.
Vanessa.
I guess I think about resources, right? Resources for conservation, resources for filmmaking are so limited. And yet at the same time, we don't have, and time is also limited, right? We have some of these problems we have to solve pretty quickly. So the benefit of collaborating with a nonprofit that's already, integrated with an issue that you may care about as a filmmaker, I mean, in terms of efficiency, it's just extremely beneficial to be collaborating with someone who's already doing that work. I think then you can take advantage of all of their knowledge in the issue, as Gina said, and also their network for outreach. And also, I think then you're making sure you're not making a film that's in a way that's not really helpful to the campaign that's already ongoing. So those are the benefits I see in collaboration.
I feel like that. Thanks for that. I feel like oftentimes, and even for those very lucky film projects that are blessed with funding, right? So often there's this impulse or this need to just build the new app, the flashy thing, and I've seen it time and time again where they're not looking at that reality and that landscape to understand that flashy thing already might exist, right? It's already underway, and as opposed to, and it's a different panel discussion, we won't get too far into it, but I think it's something that we as a field need to look at is, are we too quick to build from scratch, and are we recreating too many wheels? Do we first need to look and say, as opposed to building up a brand new standalone impact campaign, is there already an organization that's doing this work? And the better way to spend time and money is to work with them directly from the beginning. By the way, it also leads to, to evergreen, right? Meaning like it'll continue beyond the life of the film, which is something worth looking at. Like always happens, where I'm looking at the clock here, Lisa, and I'm realizing that we're getting there. There's a couple things that, and thank you for those of you who've raised questions in the chat. I want to tee up a couple of them, but also come back to one thing that we haven't talked about too much. And this is for the whole group. We can use this time to sort of talk through. I want to come back to some of the points that Beatty raised about distributors and where we see the opportunity for better collaboration, right? So I've always thought that this field, like I agree with Beatty, I think that's become leaps and bounds in large part because a lot of people who are on this panel, I mean, if those of you who haven't seen the field guide that Doc Society did, it is the Bible for this sort of work. Yeah. But I think that there is work to be done, and when this field tips, it's going to be when the distributors actually buy in and really start realizing that this is something that's in their interest to do. So I'd love to talk about that. And I think the other one, just to tee it up, Sylvia, thanks so much for teeing up this point about equity, right? I'd love for the field to talk about that as well. You know, in the wildlife filmmaking world, oftentimes we've heard this, and it's something I think we've gotten better at, where Western crews will fly to East Africa or to Southeast Asia or wherever it is in the world. They'll shoot amazing footage, they'll make an amazing film, and then they'll leave, right? And I think similarly, too often, again, I think we're doing better, but too often with an impact campaign design, we are sitting in our offices or our homes, whatever, and not working with those on the ground who are actually, whether they may be impacted populations or communities, but those who actually know what the solutions can be. And so I'm wondering how we can talk about how as a field we can do a better job of working with those on the ground who are being affected by the very problems we're trying to deal with as we create these impact campaigns. So I put those two things out there, but Beatty, maybe we can start with the distribution piece and whether you have ideas or if others have ideas around what specifically distributors and we can do better to create that collaboration in a better way.
So I'm going to get real specific with what it is that the problem is as well, rather than let's not faff about here. Let's talk about what they're actually doing right now, which is problematic. And so there was a amazing group of impact producers and filmmakers that got together at Sundance with tea to have a good old moan about what was what and what wasn't working. And I'm just found their notes. So I'm just going to read until you get bored. But these are actual things that the whole group kind of conferred amongst themselves. It was the wisdom of, they had hundreds and hundreds of campaigns between them, so they know what is working, what isn't. So examples of the challenges, specific. So one streamer shared that they have not seen data that indicates impact deepens their subscriber base. So they are not going to prioritize investing in these campaigns with financial resources or human resources. So there's just a bottom line decision there. This isn't necessarily great for our business. So I'm just going to, you know, other than the Amazon dashboard, which shares streaming numbers by country, there is no streaming data shared with filmmakers by Netflix or any other platform. The exception are high-profile films and filmmakers who have unique leverage. This means it limits our ability to actually engage and follow up with viewers, especially when we have targeted audiences we're trying to reach for impact. That's got to change. Thirdly, if the film is awards contender, the streamers awards team will often take over control of the social media platform, targeting only audiences that are beneficial for Oscar voting. I mean, go figure, that seriously limits your ability to do meaningful impact work. Countless examples of streamers being fearful as being perceived as political or partisan, trying to control the film's public messaging, silencing campaign wins. I mean, I could go on and on, but this is real and this has just got to stop. It's got to stop. It's crazy. It's not necessary. And, you know, in general, you know, I think we can get a long way by just talking a bit more. We need to get some bigger principles in play here. And I think the conversation probably needs to happen in LA amongst the big players. You know, we sit and moan in New York and we sit and moan in London and other capital cities, but truly we know where a lot of this power is vested, and it's time to sort some of this out. And, not to labor the point, when it comes to the environment and climate, I'm sorry, this kind of meddling is ridiculous. There is a planet to save and very few years to do it in. These stories are vital as ways of kind of, uplifting and transcending the conversation nationally and globally. No one should be standing in our way. No one. There's no excuse.
Love it. Thank you. Fully.
Can I offer just I totally agree with if your goal is mass distribution, but there is a hole that is not filled in distribution, and that is targeted distribution for specific impact, right? So I don't know what the business model is for that, but all you distributors out there, I would love for you to figure that out, because mass distribution, we're moving away from that as my specific team. We're moving away from mass distribution and we're moving toward targeted distribution for specific impact. So, but we're having to do it ourselves. Would be awesome if the distribution experts could come in and help us with that.
Yeah.
There certainly are some films that do need that mass distribution to achieve awareness goals. And I'll point to the Game Changers as an example of that. It's you're trying to create cultural change and almost like a pop culture level, and yet retain the ability to do what you need to do with impact. And that is a major point of friction in the distribution plans of that film, and it echoed things that we saw on Recent Extinction and other films too. So, I mean, kudos to you, Vanessa, for recognizing that kind of narrow, deep level of impact that has a really important role in this, but we do need to solve those larger problems around mass distribution. So thank you, Beatty. I'm in on whatever panel you want to.
Yeah. Maggie, yeah, please.
Yeah, I just think, excuse me, the third impact campaign finalist was the Elephant Queen, and and talking with Vicki and Mark, and so how important it is not just to do the mass. I mean, it's not one or the other, right? It's the mass distribution, but it's also very targeted in the idea of pop-up cinemas and solar buses. Or Gorongosa is also talking about this, so that it actually reaches the audiences who participate in the film right at the front line. So if you're working on elephant human coexistence, if you're working on poaching issues, that community, just like Beverly and Derek were talking about earlier, that community sometimes has the best opportunity for impact of any opportunity. And so here we are as Western filmmakers, getting people to participate in a film. That should be just a bottom line for how we give back. There should not even be a question about that, right? I mean, it's, they're giving up their lives to participate in the film. They should see a benefit. And so if we can create more models like that, that actually make that the baseline, not just an extra added on, that I would love to see that. I think we all would. I mean, as you said, Beatty, it's urgent now. We have urgent issues. This isn't just, oh, let's play around with numbers, and this should be part of the business model going forward.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
For the impact campaign finalists, I'm sure they have some really great examples of how they took their film to be seen by key stakeholders and decision makers. And you can ask them after this session, you can join a campfire together with them, and you'll be able to sit with them and ask them about that. So that would be great.
There's something I was going to say, if you don't mind. Sorry, Lisa. There are a couple of things that we've done in the past, and I think that you don't always have to separate the impact campaign film from the discussion with broadcasters or distributors. So what we've done almost our entire lives has been somewhat sneaky, and so we've often had discussions with a distributor where we say, we'll give you a beautiful big cat film if our next film is an impact film. And so we leverage one off the other so that we can get something on a different subject altogether. So we might sell a film on lions hunting buffalo, but the next film is about rescuing rhinos and the impact around that. So that's one way to grease the wheels in many ways to get your impact film out. And the other is, you were talking about collaboration and cooperation. And one example comes to mind where you can piggyback an impact film on something that's already spending a lot of money. So an IMAX film on the Amazon, for example, that's probably not going to be an impact film. You could make a deal with them and say, can we come along with you and do an impact film on that using basically your facilities, your budgets, and all of that sort of thing. So there are ways to get these things done. Sometimes it's collaboration, sometimes it's leverage.
That makes me think of, Maggie described it as a constellation of films or media. And I love that metaphor, because the mass distribution is important for certain campaigns. So is the targeted. So if we are thinking about it as a constellation instead of just one film and one campaign, I think that's a really helpful way to look at it.
There's one other thing about that, Vanessa, and to everybody. I do want to say that having an impact film and campaign doesn't remove the responsibility from the filmmakers to make bad films and to tell bad stories. I think that an impact film needs to be good storytelling as well. Otherwise, it won't be seen or resonate.
Always, yeah.
When we're choosing what films should be made and what goals we want to achieve, are we looking to see what are the most important stories that need to be told right now, given the current crisis with wildlife and the ecological systems collapsing all around us. Are we really prioritizing the goals and what we focus on? How is that being done? I'm interested to know, rather than just thinking, oh, there's a great story over there, or there's one problem that I could go and make a film about and fix that. Are we like actually taking a step back and thinking, I'm not a skilled filmmaker, but for those of you who are, I'm a skilled filmmaker, where am I needed in the world right now? How are you making those decisions? How are you like honing in on what you want to focus on?
I'll just dive in with a little bit of research because I thought this was really interesting, is that, you know, it's not just demographics, it's personality types. There's so many different ways to reach different groups of people, you know, awe in those beautiful films, outrage, curiosity. I mean, the octopus films, you know, there's just so many different ways to reach different groups. So I think the most important thing in my mind, and a lot of the people I spoke with, is actually understanding what it is you want to do with the story. You know, you have a great story, you're going to find a great story, but what is that change that you want to affect, and then having the conversations with the people on the front line, so you're not making the Western assumptions about it, that you really, you know, understand the issues deeply, that you're collaborating fully with people on the front line, with local communities, so that you really understand it from their perspective, and that you involve them in the filmmaking process, so that it's through their eyes, through their lens, that the story is getting made as well. It's not just a outside coming in, which is, when I was at Geographic for 10 years, we made great films, but, you know, it was that tradition of going in and extractive filmmaking, whatever you want to call it. And I just think going forward, we really need a different model, you know, and I think we're capable of it, and it's innovative, and there's lots of opportunity.
I'm back, Lisa.
Yeah.
Can you
my
hear
question,
me?
I wanted
There
to
you go.
know how you approach that at Vulcan Productions, and how you think people should approach it moving forward.
Yeah, in terms of
How did you decide
working with,
what to make films about? Like, how did you decide what was important and what?
sure, yeah. So Vulcan was unique in the sense that, you know, part of our approach was to really focus on the different areas that Paul Allen had always focused on philanthropically. So largely we were looking, not exclusively, looking at oceans, wildlife conservation, climate change, and then communities, and specifically the communities that are being affected by those the sort of negative things that are happening in the world there. But what we used to do is also, and you know, for those, you know, lots of us, you know, continue to do, is really to work on and look for ideas of where we can see the possibility for measurable change, right? And I think that, you know, there were some films that we would do that we wouldn't put a lot of resources into impact campaigns, largely because we couldn't define a specific problem that we thought we could really sort of push, right? You know, climate change, right? Well, what is it specifically that you're going to do? And I can't tell you how many filmmakers I've worked with, not in Vulcan projects, but also just sort of consulting or just helping, and where they say, well, what's the problem you want to solve? And I say, well, we want our film to, you know, solve climate change or stop, you know, whatever, save the oceans. It's like, well, okay, well, God bless you, right? But like, what specifically, how do you get to that sort of problem statement that's going to sort of define specifically what's there? So we approach it, you know, a lot of the same ways that Vanessa was talking about, starting off with what is that specific problem statement that we're trying to address? And once you can get consensus on that, it's been my experience that things start falling into place. Once everyone's on the same page of what success is going to look like, then you're in a better position to say, okay, now we all know that. Let's figure out how we achieve that. What are the tools, tactics, events, screenings, whatever the case may be, that we need to do that'll help us get there. But too often we just start shooting from the hip and starting too early, or starting too late rather, with an impact strategy. And then you wind up with a lot of really cool data about reach and clicks and shares and views. But when you add it up, you have no idea what you've actually accomplished, and you don't know what the impact is. But the one thing I want to get to, because I know we have a couple more minutes, I'd love just to sort of come back, Maggie, to something that you talked about, and wonder if others who haven't weighed in on this yet could do so, is this notion of equity, right? How do we make sure that we don't do, you know, you talk about extractive filmmaking, right? How do we not do extractive impact campaigns? What are some of the things you guys have done as filmmakers, perhaps, and maybe that goes to Beverly and Derek and Gina, to assure that you are not just coming from afar saying from the top down, here's what we think you should do in terms of impact, but actually working with communities to get to those actual outcomes. And you have only a couple, like 30 seconds or 40 seconds to answer, so maybe jump into it.
Well, definitely. So we, like the Maasai Olympics, we consult with the community first, find out what they really want to achieve. We apply our skills to that. Ours is a little bit less like parachuting in because we are in Africa, so we don't come in and then leave. And then we make sure that whatever we do collectively is seen over and over and over by those communities. So it's about respecting their voice.
I think finding a partner in the location where you're filming or conducting the impact campaign is key. And that's, even though we're a big institution at National Geographic, we're always working with smaller local nonprofits in our projects.
Right.
Establishing
Well, please, Gina, you go ahead.
Establishing that feedback mechanism along the way, I think, is also really important. And filmmakers tend to be very gun shy about sharing their works in progress, and I understand why. But that said, I think if you take the time to explain like what the filmmaking process is really like, and what is yet to come, and what the are for input, can help represent that equity, like you said. And something that we haven't touched on that's kind of related is establishing a mechanism for testing your theories along the way as well. And so if you say, I'm going to make this film to accomplish this goal, and yet you make a film in a vacuum and then you debut it to the world, that's the only time you're realizing whether you're successful. I mean, what a waste of time and energy and money. And so one thing that I really liked that Vulcan brought to the table on the Race Against Extinction campaign was, like, let's do some audience testing on our messaging strategy and show them some scenes from the film and say, like, does this actually move you in the way that we think it will? Otherwise, again, you're sort of imposing your own predictions around a theory of change without communicating back to the people who you're ultimately trying to reach.
There's another one thing that we're doing right now, very briefly, is we're starting an academy via our foundation to teach local filmmakers how to make their own films, which means that we don't have to participate at all. So that's one way not to be extractive.
All right, amazing, thank you. Well, we're about out of time. I just wanted to quickly address the questions that are in the Q&A. I haven't been ignoring them. I do feel like some of them are just around really like impact rather than impact campaigns. So that's why we didn't really get into them. One about developing an audience that can affect societal change and impact whilst also making sure that content, blah, blah. I think we addressed that pretty much during the conversation. I hope we did. Can filmmakers make follow-ups on the impact of their films? Is there a way to monitor that impact and revisit those communities after 10 years, for example, or do we just shoot and leave? It's a good point.
Another opportunity for funding, right? To the follow-up and the measurement in an ongoing way.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it also goes to the importance of building those evergreen partnerships at the beginning, right? So I think I've done a couple of campaigns in the past where part of what we did with an NGO was say, look, we're going to work together during this release, but this network or this filmmaker or this team is not going to be around for 3 or 4 years. And if we can figure out the way that you guys can be to continue the work when this whole team moves on to something else, not only is it's in their interest, right? Because they have great content that they can work with for years to come, but it's also an opportunity for it to go, because these are big, giant, scary problems that we're dealing with, and none of them are going to be solved between theatrical release and you know, when it starts streaming 3 months later, right? So it takes time, and building those partnerships up front is the way to do that.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you guys for asking questions. If you have any more, I think all of us, we're going to go to the lobby now. We can join the Impact Campaign film finalists there. You can ask Ted more questions. You can ask me questions, or anyone here. So please do meet us in the lobby. Thank you, Gina. Thank you, Bidi. Thank you, Maggie, Vanessa, Beverly, and Derek.
Thank you.
Thank you, National Geographic Partners, for sponsoring this session. Everyone,
And thank you, Jackson. I know this has been a weird year. I wish we were all together because it's such a magical place to be. But the Jackson team, everyone putting this together, the staff has been just absolutely amazing, putting what must be an only ridiculously impossible thing to pull off. And I think everyone I've talked to have been going to the events and going to the things have just been overwhelmed, been impressed. So thank you to the entire Jackson team for pulling this off.
Awesome. All right. Thanks, everybody. We'll see you in the lobby.